A man who does not feel safe enough and strong enough in his life to stand up from his inner authority, not from the outer authority, from his inner authority as an individual, if he's not feeling strong enough to stand up and to speak exactly who he is, what he loves, how he works, how he functions, and to be direct in his life, he will never experience his bliss, first and foremost. Because to be able to do that, he has to be deeply embodied and connected with himself to even sense who he is, to sense how he moves, to sense what he likes, to question the things that have been put in his head. All of these things are required for his development, to question everything. If he doesn't do those things, there will be very little love in him. And he will continue to live a disempowered existence, which means that he will take his disempowerment out on the rest of the world. And the same problems that we have had through history will only continue to repeat themselves. The answer is firstly love of self, and then from that love of self, bringing that love to other people.
Welcome to the Heart of Man podcast, a podcast for any man seeking to live in alignment with his deepest core and lead a life of profound meaning and connection. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and I'm here to empower you through transformative conversations, eye-opening insights, and practical wisdom. Join me now as we venture into the heart of man. Let's dive in. Chris Bale is an internationally known energy worker, qigong teacher, and intimacy mentor. In his work, Chris supports and activates deep transformations in the lives of men and women, and has been doing so for over a decade. Chris has by now worked with thousands of individuals from all over the planet from many different walks of life. As he says, he didn't choose this work, but rather he was drafted into it. His love for the spiritual began early on when he was drawn to study the energetic arts at the ripe age of 16. Once he left school in Ireland, he pursued an extensive education in many different modalities of healing, including traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, medical qigong, reiki, and sexual alchemy. Alongside that, Chris has spent many years dedicated to his own internal work, unraveling many of his own inner workings and conditionings. This eventually led him to turn his attention towards assisting others with the same process. His deep experiential understandings of energetics and how humans orient themselves on a deeper level forms the foundation of what he offers today. Now, I want to name that this conversation that we had was refreshingly raw, and I appreciated Chris's balance between being unapologetic while simultaneously deeply compassionate. So if you notice this conversation being triggering for you, just know that I meet that with understanding. When I first encountered Chris's work 2 to 3 years ago, I found myself regularly activated while listening to him. And what it revealed to me in my own experience was the very areas where I was still compromising and contorting myself to feel a sense of belonging among others. And having applied his simple yet very direct teachings into my life, I've learned to appreciate Chris's directness and his capacity to speak to things boldly, all while serving a greater purpose such as truth, love, and responsibility. In my conversation with Chris, we lay out the challenges that he sees among men at our current times, speaking to the importance of being connected to our emotionality as men while not being carried away by it. We as well have a very fascinating conversation around this idea of the mother wound, how women can support their men on their journey of growth, including some of the pitfalls that Chris sees, among various other topics. To close it off, all I'll say is buckle up for this conversation, everybody, and be ready to have your mind blown. And now, let's dive into this episode with Chris. All right, welcome back, everybody, to yet another episode at the Heart of Man. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and I'm incredibly excited and honored to be welcoming Chris Bale to the podcast today. Chris is an internationally renowned energy worker, spiritual/intimacy mentor, and qigong teacher. For over a decade, he has activated deep transformation in the lives of thousands of individuals globally. And in his work, he shares his message with an unwavering commitment towards truth, clarity, and embodied consciousness. Chris, I welcome you to the Heart of Man.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, it's an incredible honor to have the opportunity to be sitting with you again. And for our listeners, I had the special opportunity to experience a beautiful workshop just a few weeks ago, alongside Eli Buren, who has also greatly influenced me and who has also been on the podcast. The workshop was called The Cultivated Man. And within the workshop, you extensively spoke to ultimately the depth of distraction that you see among men, the overstimulation, the emotional, I'm going to say, imbalance that is present, ultimately leading men to leave their bodies. And the place that I would like us to start with our conversation today is to bring a bit of an awareness for our listeners to what it is that you currently see. And if you can expand on some of those things that you touched on within that workshop, sharing the challenges you see among men and the current, I'm going to say, playing field within the last decade of work that you've done with men.
It's a big question. It's a big area. I mean, where do I even want to start from? What men are challenged by modernly versus what men may have been challenged with previously is in many ways this quieter, less visible, sneaky type of a suffering, because we have most of our modern comforts given to us and supplied for us. Life has gotten a lot more comfortable in many, many ways. Now, of course, this is not everywhere. There's parts of the world that are in no way comfortable at all. But in the modern Western civilizations, the testing or the opportunity for initiation for men to move through is really kind of non-existent in the most part. So based on that, the man is kind of getting lost to this apathetic, lazy, addiction-fueled type of a life. And when I say addiction-fueled, addiction doesn't have to be the fact that he's on heroin or smoking crack every day. The addiction I speak of is a lot less visible, it's a lot sneakier, it's a lot more quiet, and most people are hooked on it. And that addiction comes in the form of many, many ways to perpetually distract himself from what I would refer to as reality, or what I would refer to as presence, consciousness, being able to show up in the world alert and aware of himself, not necessarily who he is, but what he is, and also what is moving around him, what's going on in this space, what is his role in this life, what is he here to be in service of. So it's this kind of internalized, addictive, obsessive, compulsive, just pissing away one's life force to the point where now he never has enough life force accessible to him to be able to see himself or recognize the things that he has become deeply distracted and owned by. That's the largest issue I see, is men have become owned by everything other than his own beingness, by everything other than his own attention and his own respect. He's owned by his phone, he's owned by his device, he's owned by whatever wounding is still sitting in him that he hasn't spent the time to unravel and go through and to let go of. This is just one version of my response to that, right? I can do a 5-day workshop event on that one area that you just brought up, but as a kind of a quick gloss over, that's my experience. Men are distracted. And because he's distracted, he's not really having full access to himself. And when he doesn't have full access to himself, well, that means he's functioning from a place of deficiency and weakness. And when a man is in a state of deficiency and weakness, well, now all of his conditioning starts to crawl its way into the front seat of his life, and then it starts to drive the car. And before he knows it, it's the end of his life. And he potentially has a lot of regrets in relation to how he's been here. So my intention is ideally to spark or to trigger something, whether it feels good or it feels unpleasant to him. It doesn't make so much of a difference to me once it lands, that it has him start to look at himself. But that's my intention, so that he doesn't have to go through his entire life until he's laying on his deathbed, and in his final moments he realizes, oh, I completely sold out. I was completely caught up. I was angry and I was bitter and I was frustrated, and I wasn't leading with lovingness and kindness and generosity in my life, and I got caught. In an ideal world, that's what I would like to support in being able to transform. I'd like to support the man in being able to be right here, right now, and to face the uncomfortable emotions that he's inevitably experiencing, and the uncomfortable emotions that he's inevitably stuffing down and avoiding, and using all of these addictive tools and crutches to kind of disassociate from.
Talk to me about what happens when we start leading ourselves into these directions, and we start facing, let's say, that uncomfortable feeling that we've been avoiding, or facing that uncomfortable conversation or that thought. Because, if I just inquire into anyone who is listening in who hasn't, let's say, stepped on that journey yet, there could be this consideration of what is the value of me doing this. And I want to hear a little bit more about what actually happens when a man really brings presence to actually what is happening here right now with him, and let's say strays away from all the ways that he's dispersing his energy elsewhere.
What happens is simultaneously nothing, which is actually home for him, to come back to a place of absolute nothingness, where there is not even a ripple of reaction in him in relation to what may be going on externally in the world. This doesn't mean to be closed down or to be disconnected or shut off. That's not what I'm speaking to. It's a level of cultivated peacefulness, deep peace, which is also connected with deep meaning, deep relief. That's the other part of it, where there's a deep relief that starts to roll through his system when he knows at any moment he can sit right back deeply into that space of nothingness, just by continuing to cultivate his ability to be and to be present in his life. So what happens? Nothing, but also everything happens, which of course is the juxtaposition of this experience. Or it's kind of ironic in a certain way, because a man might come to me and say, Chris, well, I've started meditating, just as an example, to use something as an example. I've started meditating. There's nothing peaceful. I don't feel peace. I feel awful, right? It's because everything is happening. When I say everything, I mean that he's having to now see himself for the reality of how he's been functioning. If we're functioning in a state of immaturity, we won't want to see what's there. We won't want to sit still with it, because it can almost feel like death to have to sit there and really see how you've been functioning, how you've been thinking, all the ways that you've been perpetuating conditioning onto the world, how you've been treating other people, It can be very painful, and that in itself can trigger more stories of how terrible you are or how bad you are, and then that can spiral him again back into the addictive tendencies. So it's the simplest work while simultaneously being the most difficult and confronting work for a man to start being present in his life, because then he has to see everything, which, as we see it, it exposes itself to us as being nothing. It doesn't actually matter on the grand scale of things. Most things that we have placed so much of our life force on stressing and fretting over and being just so in devotion to this thing, this piece of insanity that we refer to as so important, that starts to fall apart, starts to fall away, which means a part of his life starts to fall away. And he can spiral in those moments, or he can stay there and stay present and actually be able to face it as it falls. But that depends on the man, it depends on the situation. I've been in situations in my own life, in my own process, where I wasn't able to watch it fall, because my ego didn't want it to fall. It was too precious to my own insanity, to my own conditioning. So then I would kind of like tussle with it and roughhouse with it to try to keep it alive. But ultimately, if you keep showing up, it will dismantle. And I realize I may be veering a little bit here into another area. But that's kind of the process that I see as men go through it. And a lot of men just don't want to, right? You asked, I think you asked a question similar to like, why would he do it, or what's the point in him doing it? Yeah, what's the value in it? Well, if a man is fine in his current situation, and he's kind of, okay, life is kind of sucks, right? There's a lot of things that are problematic, but, I'm still fine. I can medicate a little bit, and I can, have my beer, or I can smoke my weed, or I can just do things that are not bad or wrong, to clarify. But he has a mechanism of just kind of surviving and being okay. As long as he's in that phase of being okay with his reality and having ways to manage it, there's no value to him to do his work at this moment. I always express, especially to women who are like, I'm trying to get my man to do his work, and I'm like, okay, firstly, stop. That's not going to be the most supportive posture to be taking in relation to this. And secondly, your man is not going to have the fortitude in him to start his work if he's not in deep suffering. Why would we choose to sit there and be present when we're like, oh, I can go do this other thing, and it hasn't messed me up fully yet, so I can still have fun doing it. There's no payoff in that moment to that person's reality. So I would say your work is not really possible unless you're in a place where you're so sick and tired of being sick and tired of being sick and tired of being sick and tired of it, and just having it continue and continue and continue until he wakes up one day and he's like, okay, I can't keep doing this. I'm in deep pain. I don't agree with this way of living anymore. Something has to change. That's it. I've never seen it be possible another way. He has to want to. And if he's asking a question like, what's the value in it? He doesn't want it enough. It has to be his only option. Then he'll be able to sit there and undergo the purification process and what it means to truly come back into your body and to start to feel yourself in ways that you may have never ever felt yourself. To me, spiritual work is dying while you're still alive. Right? That doesn't sound so attractive to most people. But there's absolutely the old way of functioning is dying now, and there's kind of a rebirthing in that process as to how one starts to live their life.
What do you see that happens once, let's say, we are ready to pursue that? Once we have come, let's say, to rock bottom, we do experience the pain and the suffering, and we're sick and tired of ourselves. What do you see happens when we start entering that journey? And you've used the word cultivation a few times, and I wonder if that's part of the process that we do, that we ultimately as well pursue that path of cultivating ourselves. So I want to hear what you see occurs for someone who's willing and ready to go on such a path.
What occurs is always drastically different from person to person. There's not a standard, okay, this will happen first, and then this will happen, and then this will happen, and then you're finished. You're never finished in my limited experience, at least. Maybe there's someone out there who's finished. I'm not sure. I haven't met them yet. But there isn't a super linear path of what's going to come up and what's going to go on for a person. They can actually look opposite in their experiences. Practically speaking, this is why modes and methods and systems of cultivation have been developed in order to kind of contain, to some degree, the process of moving through one's self in this way. The process of healing, the process of strengthening, the process of building more awareness and more embodiment in a person. And there's many different systems and practices, and some are terrible and others are exceptionally powerful. But the one thing that I have seen in 99.9% of cases that is true across the board is the length of time it takes. And this is a topic or an area that I've found to be quite triggering to a lot of people when I bring this up in more public spaces, or when I'm doing kind of like wider group events or different types of discourses or teachings. There's a lot of people there who assume that just because they've kind of decided that no, they're an energy worker or a practitioner of something, they've studied it for a few weeks or a few months or even like a year or two, like they think they've arrived in that. And it's so detrimental to a person's progress because it keeps them so limited in this delusion. There's so much delusion I see in the whole spiritual development industry, if you want to call it that at this point, because that's kind of what it is. The length of time it takes us as individuals to purify and shed and clean, and then to start to cultivate and accumulate and rebuild ourselves in a much more potent way, to start making contact with certain energetic abilities. All of these things require years and years of dedicated, cultivated practice. So most of what's out there right now is absolute nonsense. And I'm not saying that to be mean or to be nasty or to like poke a finger at people. I'm saying it from an act of protection ultimately, because the people who are in these positions calling themselves certain things without any cultivated foundation, true cultivated foundation underneath them, they run the risk of getting hurt in that process, right? It's not safe. We like to think that, energy is fluff and fairy tales and beauty and all love and light, and that's not the way it is. There's an element of that. But I just feel we're in a really unprecedented time in relation to spiritual practices and teachers and mentors and all of this stuff. And my deepest wish is that people understand the process and the path of developing oneself spiritually and cleaning and removing the deeply buried conditionings that are in us is not going to happen in a breathwork session. It's not going to happen in 6 months of it. This can take a lifetime. And I don't share that for it to be a depressing thing for people to say, oh no, it's going to take so long. That's not my purpose of sharing this. It's to champion you. It's to champion whoever may be listening to this and going, you know what? I've been calling myself these things and I've been doing this work and there's a part of me there. There's a part of me there that's like, this is kind of bullshit. Like, please question yourself. There's a part of you there that is aware that what you're doing may not be real. You may be aware that my life really hasn't transformed this much, but now I'm a coach or a mentor or I'm doing this in the world. But really, if I really look at my life honestly and myself and how I live and my thoughts and everything that's going on, I can see that not much has actually truly changed yet. And like, I want to celebrate that as a part of the human condition. It's like, yes, that's a part of it. So let's ground down into what it really takes to move through this path in an integral way.
Hearing you speak, what arises for me is, first of all, the sense of, I'm going to say, acceptance, compassion, and as well patience with one's own developmental journey, with a recognition that, you know, even if certain patterns that I believe I have outgrown, that I've integrated, that I've moved through, if I recognize, oh, they do actually come back again, it gives me a bit of more understanding, a bit more patience, a bit more compassion with myself, rather than needing to whip myself because I believe that, you know, I'm still not there in that, in this proverbial kind of like vision of where I believe I should be. And then on the other side, what I'm also really receiving from that is just this deep, I don't know if plea is the right word, but plea, I'm going to say, for humility, but then as well integrity, for the individuals that step into this type of work. And I'm going to say a devotion to continued work with oneself and not ultimately stepping out of bounds of what is available to us in terms of the type of support that we can provide. So that feels quite clear for me.
One final thing that I just wanted to kind of to tie it up with. What I've noticed is a lot of people are in an experience of being in quite a bit of a rush to arrive to some type of expertise, spiritually speaking, or practically speaking, in relation to this. Now, why are they in a rush? Well, we are in a rush when we attach our spiritual development to how we pay our bills. Because the person wants to take the course in order to monetize their spiritual development as quickly as possible because they have bills to pay, right? Bills are a part of being human. And of course, in a perfect world, never mix the two, right? This doesn't mean you don't get to charge as much money. Like, money is just a number. That's a whole other area where we can play with, but it's less about the number and the money, and it's more about the meaning and the motivations of everything that we're doing and how we're in relationship with it. And what I experience is a frequency of intense greed that can oftentimes be pushing a person, oh, I'm going to do this and learn this so I can immediately monetize it and then start making money from it. It's like, yeah, but you don't even know it yet. So, like, what's going to happen in that cloudy interaction now? Like, this agreement that you're stepping into, people assume nothing's governing what's happening here, right? But there's balance and imbalance and karma and all these things that are heavily present. So we're going into something with a kind of a relatively filthy agreement happening. Not because we're bad or not because we're less than, or anything like that. It's more just to do with a blind spot. It's more just to do with how we're being driven societally in many of these areas. And another way I see it is this is what happens when you take something like spirituality and you take something like the American dream and you merge them both together. Well, now you have, I don't know, I was going to use a name, but I don't want to use a name of someone. But, someone very well known who does these massive seminars, and they're like sales pitches almost, and there's like Avicii music, pumping in the background, and everyone thinks their life has changed because they've hit the adrenaline in that person very systematically throughout this course. And then the person kind of wakes up 2 weeks later after the event and their life is exactly the same and almost nothing has changed. So, it's these things we need to start opening our eyes to, because we're not stupid. We're incredibly intelligent individuals. But when we get caught up, when we're in trauma, when there's conditioning, our behaviors can start to become quite foolish. Again, not as a bad thing, not as an insult, but just to shine a magnifying glass on that. And we can correct all of this just simply by generating more awareness and seeing all the ways that we're desperately trying to rush processes, because the rush is from fear, it's from panic. That's not safe to listen to. It's not safe to follow that rush. And you will, and then you learn how it's not safe to follow the rush. And that's a part of how life teaches us, and including me, right? I'm not sitting here being the perfect one who has not made any of the mistakes that I'm referring to. I have made every single mistake that I am speaking to, and I am right there in the muck of life with everyone, and every single day that I wake up. The difference between me and, let's say, most of the people that I engage with is nothing other than my accountability. And am I way more accountable and responsible and disciplined than other people because I'm just so much better? No, it's because I don't have a choice. If I'm not accountable and responsible and disciplined, life will start to fall apart. Right? I won't be able to show up the way that I'm here to show up. And I take little credit for whatever development I've been through. I take very little credit for that. It's just a response of, there's no other option. I don't have another option. I was a drug addict, functional, but ultimately, if I look at it, I was a drug addict, I was an alcoholic, I was a debaucherous DJ. I lived a very, very hedonistic life for a lot of my earlier life. So much fun, loved it, wouldn't change it for anything. And if I could have sustained it without dying, I would have kept doing it. So there's no I'm of higher spiritual order than people because I choose to be doing 2 or 3 or 4 hours of cultivation every day. And it's not that. It's because it's my only option. There's people who can get away with not being present and conscious and cultivated way longer than I could ever do now. And a part of how I choose to receive that is we're all here for different reasons and for different things, and our paths are all very, very different. So this is just what I'm here for, and if I stray off of that, I'm ultimately not punished, but I'll feel the internal experience of what happens when I move off of that, just like someone else when they move off of theirs. But I hope it's clear and evident that I'm sharing what I'm sharing to illuminate stuff. I'm not sharing what I'm sharing to judge or attack or point fingers or to look down upon anyone who is not following the things that I'm saying. Ultimately, fuck what I say if it's not in alignment with your path. I'm just here to speak from me. So I think that's an important thing to state. But if someone's going to call themselves something in the world and come into the space that I'm also moving around in, and I see all the places that person is not who they say they are, then I have to speak to that.
Yeah, I feel that this message is coming through absolutely. And for anyone listening in, I highly encourage you to read through Chris's latest blog post. where I feel like in many ways you communicated this as well in written form, and I'm very happy to as well share that in the show notes. But it was definitely as well very illuminating for me. So thank you for that, Chris. Hey, it's Alex here. I wanted to take this short interruption to share with all of you this important notice, which is it's now been an entire year since Heart of Man was launched. Now, first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank you all for getting on this wild ride with me. I deeply love sharing these conversations with all of you and honor you for taking your own valuable time to listen in. And my dearest hope is to be able to reach even more people with these messages so they too can receive benefit from these discussions. So I want to take this moment during this special milestone in order to remind you how you can support this mission. The first way is by providing a 5-star rating on Spotify. And if you're feeling extra generous, taking a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. This not only helps more people discover the podcast, but also gives me the opportunity to reach more amazing guests in the future. The other way you're able to support is by sharing this podcast with your friends or people you believe could benefit from it. So a challenge I'd love to offer is sharing an episode that resonated with you with 5 other people. This will truly mean the world to me. Thank you, and I deeply appreciate you and your support. Now, let's get back to our conversation. I would like to pivot the conversation a little bit towards this conversation around power. And over the years, as I've been exposed to your work, I've heard you frequently speak to the fact that men seek to be in contact with their own sense of power. And within that, I want to hear from you, first of all, what is power according to you, and why is this such an important principle for us, especially as men, to be in contact with?
This is a tough one to answer because there's multiple ways for us to communicate and express to one another, obviously, energetically and physically and all these other ways. But in this means we're using words, and with semantics, individuals will take a word and they'll kind of overdub their understanding and their meaning onto it. So let's say I say the word energy, right, which I say a lot. I'm aware that many people who hear me say that word are not actually hearing what I'm saying, because they only have their understanding of what energy means to them, which may be completely different to my felt sense experience of it, having it been cultivated over over many years. So I kind of preface with this because firstly, power in itself has so many different meanings and connotations. Some people will hear power and they'll feel very triggered, and that's why the world is the way it is and all the pain, and because of men who are power hungry and who just want power. And again, we're all using the same word power, but their meaning of it is very, very different. Their projection on it is very, very different. So when you ask me about power, you're saying, what is it? Across the board, a word that I'm going to follow up with is also probably the most misprojected word ever. Power is the level of love that individual has cultivated, practiced, lived in his life or her life, and the depth of understanding in relation to what love is on the deeper levels. The power of an individual is the amount of love that they carry in their system, that they're connected with, and their ability to share it, to give it endlessly to other people as a source of more life. Love is the most powerful frequency. Kindness, generosity, these are the most powerful frequencies that we have access to. It governs everything here. Now, me saying the word love, everyone listening probably has a different understanding of it, is maybe at different levels of understanding it. And that's where it becomes tricky. Because to say that to someone who has been, or who feels like they've been used, to a person who feels like they've given so much in life to people, everyone but themselves, and they've self-sacrificed so much to be loving, they'll hear me say that and they'll say, oh, well, what about me? And okay, you weren't given love if that was your experience of it. Love has almost been weaponized. Power, love, have almost been weaponized. They've been completely distorted in their meanings and in their energetic integrities. A person who is living that life of, oh my God, I felt so used by everyone, no one respects me, I just give, and no one even sees me. That person is in a deep state of not love. They've been functioning from a deep state of lack, potentially. Hatefulness in relation to themselves first and foremost. So then what they call giving, or what they call love that they're giving to other people, was never love to begin with. It was a means of survival for them. Right? It goes very, very deep into all of these different corners. And when we start to attach a word like love or a word like power with the experience I just spoke to, or the word power to, let's say, a male figure in politics who is all the worst things in the world, and he just dominates and he kills people, and he's like, that's not power. How could we refer to that as power? That's sickness. That is not male being power hungry. That is a man who is deeply unwell and who is perpetuating his unwellness onto the planet. That isn't masculinity. So I feel we actually have to spend a lot of time deciphering and understanding and having discussions about words that are so massive in the frequencies that they hold, so we can kind of come to a more collective understanding as to what it is and also what it's not. So we don't trick ourselves and assume that that thing that's hurt us was love, or that thing that hurt us was power, or if I give too much love, now people abuse me and they take from me, and I'm going to hold on to my love and close my heart and only give it to those who deserve it. That's like the most unloving statement to make. I'll only open my heart to those who deserve it. Right? This is fear that's governing our relationships. Fear, and then it leads to control, and we can keep going down that rabbit hole. So I know it was a big preface, but it felt very important before I started using these words to speak to some aspects of it. So you asked what is power, and my response to what is power is love. Love. The level of cultivated love is what is power here on this planet. And there's a lot of distorted versions of it. Power hungry is not power. It's a deep state of lack and a need for control. Power can be mimicked when an individual is maybe not so embodied in themselves. Because if we break it down to polarity terms or to relational terms, a woman is going to naturally want to be penetrated and open to that which is powerful. No. We all know someone, we all know a woman or women in our lives who have opened or have let in men who have been attempting to depict behaviors, actions, expressions, movements of power. She's realized quickly after that did not feel good to her, that she was not treated well. There wasn't so much love present there. So if a person is not embodied, they're severed from their intelligence. When we're severed from our intelligence, we start to be tricked and manipulated And we start to believe that, oh, the rock star on the stage who was all of these people just screaming his name or her name. We're like, oh my God, he's so powerful. I want to let him in. But the rock star is a drug addict. Has all of these other deep traumas going on in their system. We see the person with a lot of money or a lot of resource. We start using the word a very powerful person, a very powerful man, which only distorts it more and more and more. When we are present in our bodies and when we have walked through our own conditioning to a certain point, we can really start to feel what is true and what is false. So please be aware of the behaviors, expressions, and movements that are attempting to convince the outside world that this is power, that this is powerful, because those are the most dangerous frequencies to then let in. Because it's using you to try to feel a sense of power, which is the most unpowerful thing to move towards. I hope that it's making sense the way that I'm attempting to express it and communicate it. I don't know how of a good job I'm doing with it right now, but there's so many layers of it that I'm attempting to clarify.
No, I feel like you're doing a really good job, and I really appreciate as well how you seek to clarify, just the interpretation or maybe just the understanding behind the word and the recognition of how most, or I'm going to say many individuals in the world are moving with that word, and then the understanding that a lot of individuals come from with it. I want to deepen the conversation around, I guess, the conversation around polarity and relational terms, because I felt that you've always, or let's just say it this way, I've always appreciated the way you've communicated it and the grounded, I'm going to say, approach that you've taken. And one of the things that I've heard you regularly speak of is this idea that a man's strength comes from his feminine energy. And I would love for you to elaborate on that and give us an understanding of what it is that you mean when you say this.
Hello. If we have a sword which can either do a lot of damage or could protect a whole community, if we have a sword which is neutral, right? The masculinity is neutral in that expression, but we are not able to see and feel and empathize with our environment or our community. The sword is very uninformed. So how the man wields the sword that he has access to, how he uses it, can really go in any direction. If he's not sensitive enough to feel and interpret and sense what's actually going on in this space right now, well, then we have to ask ourselves, what is informing how he moves the sword? For many men, what's informing how he moves his sword is his trauma, is his programming, is his conditioning, which has nothing to do with any form of truth. He can be raised to be bitter and angry and resentful and told how weak he is in every moment. So now that little boy, as he grows up, he needs to use his sword to show people how he's none of the things that he was traumatized by, or how he was convinced by, how he was hurt by as he was growing up. So now the man becomes very dangerous, and not in the beautiful way, not in the protective way. Now he has a motive to actually take his pain out on the world, so that the world can finally reflect back to him how everything that he was told about how weak he is false. That's men's biggest fear, to be weak. Why do you think there's gyms there? right? Like, not every man, obviously, but we want to take every single option that we can possibly take to validate our strength. So it feels worth it to even be here on this planet. Because the most excruciating experience for a man is to be here and to feel weak, to feel like he's not enough in that regard. So why is the feminine aspect of his development? I'm starting to get to a point where I don't even want to use these words anymore because of how just torn apart they've become and obliterated, and all these people just like make shit up these days and go, oh, this is the feminine or this is the masculine. That's like, where did you get that piece of information? Like, who just made that up and gave it to you? Which is the nature of, how things are right now. It's totally fine. It'll correct itself. But the reason he but would greatly benefit him to cultivate his ability to sit with and feel his emotions, because this is what it comes all the way back to. If a man is not able to understand himself, like what's going on in him, the feelings that he is having on a moment-to-moment basis, if he's not really spending time, doesn't have to be a lot of time at all. Don't waste your time spending too much time. It's unnecessary, because then he'll identify with it and then he'll be led by his feelings, which is also dangerous. But enough time to be able to sit with himself and to examine himself and to build the capacity to not shy away from emotional uncomfortability. Great way to see this is him in relationship with his partner or with women. If she's in an emotional reaction, does he pull away? Does he have all this reaction towards it? Does he want to move on to the next one? If he is not able to cultivate the ability to sit with all of this and to start to mature himself in relation to his emotionality and feelings, he'll be very dangerous and not in the beautiful way. So that is why a man's strength is highly, highly connected with his ability to sense and to feel what's going on around him and inside him, so he can empathize, so he can truly understand his experience, so that then all of the information that's coming back at him, all of the reality that's happening around him, he gets to sit with it and then ask himself questions like, is this true or is this a projection? Is this real or is this false? Then he can decide what motivates the movement. The feminine principle is deeply informing. There's a lot of intuitional intelligence in being able to feel oneself. And the beauty of the masculine, or that male way of functioning, is, oh, this doesn't work the way that I wanted it to work. Let me break it up, put it back together, make it better. Now it works perfectly. Why do we have buildings and houses and airplanes and roads and sewer systems and every single thing that has been built that functions, that makes our life in certain areas so much easier, so much more comfortable, is because men in their masculine have scratched their head and said, I don't like this. This isn't good enough. Let me break it and put it back together and make it better. And then let me bring it to the closest woman and go, hey, look at this. What do you think? Right? Because that's what's going to happen. And that's how we're designed. And that's totally fine. So it's also important that in a time where especially women who are moving through spiritual development work, who may be a little bit off-center in their own process, maybe they've been caught up in some of the information they've received and are constantly pulling at their men to feel more. I want you to be in your heart more, be in your emotions more. No, the fuck you don't. You don't want that, right? That is not safe for anyone involved. Let the man be the man. Let him be who he is. He was designed in many ways to fix stuff and then to make stuff better on the practical level. It doesn't serve him to be all up in his emotions all of the time in a way where he just becomes carried away and identified with it, because that's what you see now, men in spiritual communities. They're all over the place. You can't trust a lot of these men. They're ungrounded. Again, not to be mean or to poke but definitely to challenge. It's like, hey, what are you doing? You're wasting your time and your energy here. And then he becomes more erratic. His life becomes more confusing. Everything starts to lose its clarity because he does not have a healthy relationship between his felt sense, his emotionality, and his groundedness, his cultivation. Again, a massive topic that requires so much nuance, and I don't want people to just take it immediately the way that I'm saying it right now, because there's so many different angles that I would have to approach this in order for it to be of complete integrity. And we don't have the time right now for me to do that. But I just want to say it's not as easy as just that. But from a masculine space, it is as easy as just that. Feel your feelings, but don't carry them into the world with you and put them onto everything. And also, you don't need to be there to hold space for everyone all the time, because if someone keeps bringing me a problem or I identify the emotionality as an issue, I'll listen to my love. I'll hold space for her. I'll be present with her until this problem, because now it's a problem to me, keeps bringing itself back. Oh, this wasn't just yesterday. This has been for 7 days. Okay, I'm not holding space anymore. Let's fix this. Oh, but I don't want you to fix it. I just want you to listen to me and hold space to me. Cool. Bring it to your girlfriends. Right? A message to women out there. Stop treating your man like your girlfriend. Because not only are you supporting the weakening in him, you're also going to bring him and lead him to a place of then totally resenting him and not wanting him to even engage with you because you've turned him into your girlfriend or into your son, into your child. So again, there's things on both sides here, but there's definitely elements that have been shamed in men. And I think it's ridiculous because some of the parts that are being shamed in men are the reasons why we have such beautiful existences right now. How things work so well. We can fly across the world. We can just, take a shit into a toilet and just flush it. And then we just walk away and then we turn on our coffee machine and it's like, all these things just magically fall out of the sky apparently. It's like, no, there's men in the sewer where your shit comes down and he's in there doing horrific work in order to make sure stuff functions. Coffee machine was built by someone. It didn't just arrive here. Again, I'm playfully challenging people with this because we forget a lot of stuff. And we need men to function as men here. It's not good for him to be all in his feelings, but it's essential for him to be sensitive enough to sense, to feel, to empathize with himself and with others, but never to wallow in it. That's the difference. And that's where cultivation comes in. That's where internal development for men comes in. That's what's important. An uncultivated man is not a trustworthy man. Not because he's bad, but because he can't even hold himself accountable. He doesn't even trust himself. He can't stay present with himself. He's bouncing around all the time. And that's just facts. And facts are helpful. It's supportive for us to also look at feelings and then go, okay, but what are the facts of this experience? But I'd love for you to continue on whatever narrative you'd like to go in, because once I start, I can have an issue.
Sure. No, I mean, I appreciated the depth that you brought this conversation into, and it felt really good just to actually allow it to roll out. And I recognize that this is a very important conversation as well for us to have as men, and to as well bring in the nuance in the conversation. Because as you said, there is this important element to ultimately be in touch with our bodily intelligence, as I would say it, and to have the great capacity to sense and to attune. And, if I were to just bring it to the personal for a moment, I've definitely seen in myself that there was a moment in time I got deeply hurt, and there was a moment where I was like, all right, I don't want to feel this anymore, and I just wanted to disconnect. And I was kind of the classic guy who went to the gym and packed on a lot of muscle and wanted to make sure that, I create this deep, deep armor around the place of my chest to ensure that I never get hurt again. However, I did recognize that the compass that I was moving through the world with skewed. And ultimately, it didn't lead me into the places, let's just say, that I wanted to go to. And when I started entering more into the path of, let's say, feeling the feelings or touching on the things that were underneath the surface that were ultimately getting to a point of screaming at me, that's when I swung the other way. And I went completely in the other direction, right? And, as you may know, I live in Bali at the moment, and you meet a lot of individuals here, let's just say, that swing far the other way and ultimately beautifully, I'm going to say, come into touch with that expression of themselves. But I definitely see that erratic, ungrounded nature in them, and I've definitely seen that experience as well in myself. And that's where I've come as well into the felt sense experience in my own way. Okay, there's a line here, and it actually feels more aligned to be less identified with feeling and have the capacity to still contain, to witness, to observe, and to still have it be deeply part of my experience, but not be run by it. So I think that's kind of the piece that I would like to just bring on what you said.
Well, that's beautiful, because what you also demonstrated in that moment where you decided, oh, the feeling is too much now, you were able to shut it down and move into a completely different frequency. And some people will call this avoidance. And yeah, sure, it's you can call it avoidance. Whether that avoidance is negative and detrimental is based on the circumstances, the situation. It's different and varying for every single individual. But I know if I'm in a room with some other men and some shit goes down and someone enters that space, or a bear enters that space, or a danger presents itself, I want to be with men who sure can feel and intuit and be present, but I want to be with men who have the ability to shut their emotions down in order to get some shit done right now.
Absolutely.
Versus the man who's, oh my God, I don't consent to the bear being here. The emotionality just completely crippling and freezing him. I don't want to be there with that type of man. We have the ability as men to be in feelings and emotions and then to shut it down immediately to tackle something. And for any man who's watching this or listening to this and is in their spiritual process, please know that that is a beautiful and necessary element for us to continue to move between. If I'm in a certain mode of doing something, there's no room for my feelings right now. I could feel all the ways, I just don't want to do it. It's not my truth right now to do this. It's just so out of alignment for me to do this thing that I'm responsible to do, right? And I'm making it more about me than the service of whatever it is I'm here to do. I need to be able to shut that down. I need to be able to ground down, to be present enough to dissolve through that emotionality and to show up clean in that experience. To me, this is just being mature. And of course, as we've seen in history, we can be way too in that place. And then all of the other beauty that comes with rest and restoration and feeling and connection and intimacy and lovingness, all of that starts to be pulled away from us. And the man burns out. He gets hard and rigid and sick at a certain point. So it's a necessity for both, but please, men, it's beautiful that you have that mechanism to shut things down. Just make sure you know how to open it back up when it serves you and others.
I appreciate you communicating this and really, I'm going to say as well, giving us a permission field as men to ultimately, to welcome that part, because I do see that it has been just so shamed as well in our culture to some regard. some, of course, very valid reasons to some degree, and simultaneously recognizing that this can as well be a beautiful part of us, right? So, Chris, before we close off with our conversation, I feel like I can't come to an end without going into a conversation that I deeply wanted to go into with you, which is this conversation around the mother wound. And I'm aware that in your work with men, this is something that you regularly bring in. From my understanding, you deeply recognize it as I'm going to say, a fabric of our culture at this moment, and deeply as part of the psyche around men. And I want to just name that, to some regard, like, this is kind of a self-serving question as well, because I recognize in my own life, let's just say I've become more aware of how this is playing out in my own life. And just to give a little bit of context, I've come to recognize the wounding that I've experienced, especially around areas of manipulation. And so with that, I've come to recognize intimacy doesn't feel safe. I want to trust, but a part of me doesn't feel safe to. And so this is the way it expresses itself for me at the moment. So I recognize I have a bit more of an aversive relationship to it. I can recognize that there is as well a bit more of a clinging relationship that can come in. But I want to hear a little bit more about what it is that you see among men and how as well we can work through it.
We come from women as men. I'm only here because I was existing inside of a woman's body for a number of months, and that woman fed me and nourished me and kept me alive, and then that woman birthed me and went through that whole experience, and then that woman's just unrelenting love for me started to appear, and then I was kind of greeted in the world with that, and I was held by this woman, and I was cared for by this woman, and I was, as I started to develop more in my own personality and my own way of being and my own consciousness, and my awakeness started to alert itself, well, now she started to tell me what directions to move in and what to pick up and what not to pick up, and oh, that's good, and then maybe I'd have an experience, and all of a sudden that's bad. No, I don't like that. And then I'm looking at it going, but she loves me, and she's there to take care of me, and she's essentially God to me in this moment of my life, whether I'm a few months or a few years, and like, she's the source of ultimately almost everything. Dad is there. He's cool. He's fun. I can kick it with him. But this thing in front of me this is my access point for everything that I need to feel safe, to feel healthy. And also it's that which brings me love. That's how we start, most of us. That's a hell of a start in terms of having absolutely no sovereignty or a sense of self. Now, depending on the woman that brought you into this world, by osmosis, not just through behaviors and speech, just through transference of being around that person, not only have you inherited much of that person's DNA and lineage and ancestry and bloodline and everything that this person has come through and all the traumas that they've experienced, you're also taking on in this life everything that she has experienced in terms of her trauma in relation to men, in relation to your father, in relation to the fears that she may have around money or around health, or everything is just kind of coming at you. As little boys, I always say we're raised on a diet of love and praise and discipline and punishment, right? That's kind of it. And we start to understand this pretty early on with our intelligent little selves. And we go, oh, if I do this thing, mom comes at me with love and hugs and kisses, and I'm the best, strongest little boy, because even when we're little boys, no one can tell me there's a difference between little boys and little girls. As little boys, look how high I can jump. Look how high I can jump. I can jump higher than anyone, right? And then you'll tell him, yes, you can. And that little boy will feel so good that he can jump higher because that's a reflection of the world, that he's enough and that he's strong and that he's powerful in himself. So that's a whole other topic. But when we're constantly starting to see patterns now of, mom doesn't like this, or God doesn't give me love when I do these things, but God gives me love when I do these things, love feels better. So now we start to learn to manipulate very early on. We also start to get into these, just by default, distorted and dysfunctional relationships in relation to our mother, where now we move into a phase where she's going from this maybe deeply loving, baby caring individual to a boss of sorts, right? Like maybe even like a drill sergeant in certain ways. Don't do this. That's wrong. That's bad. Don't go in this direction. No, shouldn't do this. And now she starts to tell us the decisions to make in our lives. And we're driven and we're driven and we're driven with all of her expectations and her ideas, again, depending on the mother, depending on the relationship. The experience differs on many levels, but all of this is happening when we're at our most receptive years. It programs us and sets us up for everything else that's going to unfold in life. Many men never make it out of 6 years of age. I'll work with men who are in their 60s, 50s. They're still functioning as a child in relation to the decisions and the directions they should move. They're just hearing their mother's voice in relation to everything. And because of this manipulation, what it communicates to men, firstly, is that you're not safe unless the woman that you're with, when he moves out in the world and starts dating and meeting women, you're not safe unless the woman that you're with, firstly, is in a regulated emotional state. So she's having no feelings about anything. She's just happy. That's why, man, I just want you to be happy. I just want you to be sweet. I just want you to be loving. And the woman is like pulling her hair out going, what do you mean? I'm a woman. I've got so many feelings all of the time. So as men, we hyper-personalize every woman's emotional experience because that's what we did with our mother. That's what we learned in our monogamous relationship with our mother in our earlier years. So we don't feel safe unless we're being loved by her, we're being accepted by her, we're being praised and given love by her. So we want to figure out the mechanism for the women that we meet out in the world as to how do I need to manipulate this individual woman in order to get my needs met. Now, the more a man repeats this process, the more he has to walk away from, ignore, and shut down his way of functioning in the world as a man. That's why the initiation process of freeing oneself from their mother, from essentially eradicating her voice inside of him, if we don't go through that process, it never dies. We're never free. And I feel like in other traditions and in ancient cultures, there was a process when the boy reached a certain age where he was either just thrown out into the wilderness for 30 days, or there was some type of ritual to signify you're no longer the child of your mother. Now you're a mature grown man. Let's all celebrate that. Let's hold you accountable. Let's start treating you very, very differently. And now your mother is no longer available to you in the ways that she once was. Now the relationship has to become a new one. There has to be a new connection formed from a new place. And we don't have that. So that's why it creates a lot of issues and relational problems. One of the largest ways that it shows up is the fact that without an initiation, without inner work and cultivation, the man will be completely dishonest in all of his communications with women. It doesn't mean he's lying, because he'll still say maybe what he wants to say, but he'll change his wording and he'll start to water himself down, because the worst thing in the world is for her to not approve of what he says, of what he likes, of what he works, or of the way he works and functions in the world. So it's very evident really quickly to me, and you can see this out in the world. Any man who is not direct with women who is not able to say it the way that he experiences it, who he is, what he likes, the way he functions, if he's not able to invite her directly and ask her into certain experiences, all of this is evidence that there's a mother wound that's still quite present in him, because he's afraid, he's fearful of being who he is in the world and fully stepping into ownership over that, because he's been manipulated and conditioned to think that him being truthful and real and authentic as a man, the way a man works, is bad, right? Because men are the problem now. So it's like the worst time to try to be a healthy man, an empowered man, because everything coming at you is letting you know all the ways you're horrific for just even existing. If you happen to be straight on top of that and white on top of that, it's even, it's piled on even more. History happens, so many things happen, but what I want to keep us focused on is how loving can we be? How kind can we be to one another? How generous can we be? That's the only thing that will repair all of the distortion, the pain, the trauma, the wounding. Not having to pay amends and to sit down and everyone just whipping one another for history. That is the most retarded thing that we could potentially do in this life in an attempt to come back into health. Retardation is the word used to describe the slowing down of internal functions and intelligence. Anything can be retarded. Anything can slow down in its progression. Right now, I think we're deeply in a state of socialistic retardation in many ways, where we've slowed down so perpetually and our intelligence has been so diminished that we've become so focused on hatefulness, on making everyone else pay for whatever has went on, and women towards men, men towards women. It's just a little quieter in that regard. Men internalize it and take it out in different ways. And I use this word purposefully because I know it's a strong word. I know many people have really big triggers around that word. I'm using the word so people hear what I'm saying. I don't care what the word is. I'm saying it simply to get a person's attention, right? Not to talk about a certain sect of people and make them feel bad. That's your feelings are nothing to do with me. Take responsibility. That's the deepest love that we can step into. That's empowerment. And unless we start correcting to, how can I just start loving, being kinder, being more generous, letting everything dissolve, letting everything off the hook. Because to carry everything on a hook is painful to us deeply, more than anything first. It's painful to carry that around. So that is my invitation and my plea is to just very simply, basically have people ask themselves, how kind, how loving, how generous have I been today? Or have I just tried to punish people around me by, holding them in a posture of having to prove themselves for everything that has went on in the past? We'll never get out of that without someone going first in love and acceptance and generousness and saying, you know what, we can just let that dissolve. We can let that burn away. Let's choose to be loving from now. That's the quickest way to begin to eradicate this. And to loop this back into the mother wound conversation, a man who does not feel safe enough and strong enough in his life to stand up from his inner authority, not from the outer authority, not from the woman's authority, from his inner authority as an individual, if he's not feeling strong enough to stand up and to speak exactly who he is, what he loves, how he works, how he functions, and to be direct in his life, he will never experience his male bliss, first and foremost. Because to be able to do that, he has to be deeply embodied and connected with himself to even sense who he is, to sense how he moves, to sense what he likes, to question the things that have been put in his head. All of these things are required for his development, to question everything, including what I'm saying if needs be. If he doesn't do those things, there will be very little love in him, and he will continue to live a disempowered existence which means that he will take his disempowerment out on the rest of the world, and the same problems that we have had through history will only continue to repeat themselves. The answer is firstly love of self, and then from that love of self, bringing that love to other people in a way where it's not based on what did I get in return for my love, right? It's not like, what did I get? I was so loving and I got nothing. Newsflash, that's not love. You're tricking yourself. Love is not painful. It's never once painful. So that's what I want to share with people. That's the quick way. That's the quick solution to the thing that we're all actually seeking. But if our ego is strong, if our traumas are strong, if our mind is strong, it's too painful to go right there. It wants to kind of manipulate everything all of the time. So we'll get a little bit closer and then we'll pull away because, well, they don't deserve that love. I have to punish something. That's what our pain says. But the sooner, the quicker we can go directly to that, the quicker everything can shift.
Beautifully said, Chris. And I feel like I could just talk to you for hours. But I want to respect your time. I want to honor our time together and slowly start winding the conversation down. So before I ask you my final question, I want to just give you the space and ask you, where can our listeners find you? And I wonder if there's anything that you would like to bring our listeners in awareness to.
How can they find me? Well, first, they would want to find me. And if they want to find me, I don't need to give them any information. They'll find me. My name is there. So I'm doing this purposefully. I'm responding the way I'm responding purposefully. If someone is truly interested in what I'm up to, they've maybe already went and Googled me midway through this conversation. And if that hasn't occurred and you're not feeling pulled to, then you don't need my information. So I like to play with it a little bit.
I love that answer. And yeah, I mean, I guess for anyone who needs a helping hand, I'll definitely support you, Chris, and put your links as well in the show notes. Before I ask you my final question, I just want to take a moment just to acknowledge and honor you, and just want to say that I've been exposed to your work for the last, I'm going to say 2 to 3 years, and it's just been profound how simply listening to you and just taking, I'm going to say, the insights that I've taken and applying them into my life, how they have deeply shaped me and how they have deeply influenced me. And, just really honoring the work that you do as well in terms of bringing it in such a simple and grounded way. And I notice sometimes I would get irritated just by kind of how simple and easy you kind of make it. I'm like, I want it fucking complex. I want it harder and all these things, right? But it gave me, I'm going to say, it brought it back to deeper accountability and deeper ownership and responsibility of what's right here in front of me. And so I just want to thank you for your work, and just want to give a shout out to all the listeners here. I highly encourage you to check out Chris's work in the world. He does phenomenal work, and it feels like such an honor for me to be in conversation with you.
Thank you. What a gift to receive. I really appreciate it. And at the same time, it'll all completely go over my head. I can receive what I can receive from it, but it's helpful for me to hear these things because I'm so in it. Like I live what I teach and what I speak, and because of that, I don't really see or hear much in relation to what I do unless I'm working one-on-one or working with a group. But I'm not on the internet looking at, I want to be as away from that as possible. So I forget a lot of the potential value that can be there. So it's really helpful for me to be able to receive that from you, because then it reminds me to maybe I should continue to share something, or say something, because it just goes into the abyss when it goes out there. So thank you for bouncing it back, so it can help me to actually continue to do it if I'm supposed to continue to do it. So I appreciate it, and I really appreciate you being willing to take on the simplicity, because I know it can be really triggering when it's almost like we've been programmed for it's supposed to be complicated, for it to be of value, right? It's got to be complicated, and the more steps, the more complication, the more valuable. And the opposite has been true for me across all accounts of my own process. And that's what I try to be honest in, and that's what I try to share with people, that it's all accessible right now, but to be able to maintain it will take you years. And if you can know that going in, you can let go of the expectations that we've been conditioned with, of like, oh, is everything supposed to change in this weekend workshop or these 2 courses? It will call you, simplicity will call us into full accountability and full responsibility. And anything that's too complicated, I don't buy it. I don't, unless it's practical, like building an aeroplane or something like that. But for spiritual work, anything that's too complicated, I recommend people deeply question it and challenge it. Yeah, but thank you. I appreciate you inviting me on here, and yeah, it was an honor to express and to share and to connect with you.
Thank you, Chris. I want to ask you a final question, and it kind of got inspired from the beginning of our conversation. I guess what I want to just bring in, first of all, one of the pain points that I see, which always breaks my heart when I do see it, is how with a lot of the men that I'm at times exposed with, there is a sense like this feeling like they don't matter, or that they're not really bringing anything that is of matter into the world. And you spoke to this idea that a lot of men don't know who they are, but it seemed like this was more important to you, what he is. And I would like you just to maybe take a moment just to speak to that, and maybe speak to that individual that feels like he doesn't matter and that he doesn't ultimately bring any value into the world. So I know it's a high ask, but I trust in your ability to speak to this.
Well, we'll find out. We'll see. This is a real experience right now for so many men, where he feels like he's kind of just been tossed away into his basement or his bedroom. And the reason being is, firstly, everything has been made so comfortable physically in terms of just everything we have access to, the dangers that were once present, and the very polarizing reason that a community would need a man to be there, which was very practical, right? Protection being a huge part of that, just because of his physicality and his bone structure and how he functions. It comes in useful for different reasons. His practicality of how he approaches things. A lot of that has kind of been handled for us. Now, things have been systemized, and now with AI, that's only going to continue to increase itself. So I love that you're bringing up this question, or bringing up this issue that we're experiencing. And what I would say to that man, firstly, is, by definition of being here, by definition of being alive in this moment and present on the planet, you are required. Because if you weren't required, you wouldn't be alive right now. I believe there's something greater that's overseeing everything here. There's a greater consciousness. There is an intelligence that we all are of, that we all come from, that is overseeing everything, and nothing is by chance. Everything is so specifically purposeful. Again, I believe. A young boy or a young man or a man of any age that feels like he doesn't matter, all that's speaking to is that you have not yet shown up in your life in connection with the part of you, in the actualization, in the expression of the part of you that is deeply powerful and beautiful and really deeply required for this planet. When we are so traumatized and so dominated, and then we're treated like shit essentially by being figured out, right? So someone will figure us out that, oh, men like porn and men like sex and men like this and men like video games, and they'll start to find all these things for us, and then they'll want to sell it all to us so they can take from us and monetize us. And then it's the man, ultimately, it's the addict who starts to fade away and suffer from that. What I would say to men who are feeling the lack of mattering or like they're not of value, I would highly encourage him firstly to start going out of his house if he's having an issue with that. I would have him start looking and really questioning and starting to write down everything that he's feeling and experiencing just to get it out on a page. I would ask him to start asking himself, what are some things he loves? What are some things he'd love to be experiencing? What are things he would love to move towards in his life? Even if he thinks he can't right now or whatever, write them down, start making note of them, just let things start moving. But the feeling of not being of value is because we're not being called to anything. As men, we respond generally to being needed for something. If we don't feel like the problem or the issue or the situation truly needs us, we just kind of wither away into the background. And I also share this with women, and if there's any women listening, rather than asking your man for something or telling him he's supposed to do something, which will only shut him down even more, he won't respond to that. Call him into something. Call on him. You need him. I need you for something. Let him know he's needed for something, because he is. And we've gotten very good at, I'm so sovereign, I don't need anybody for anything. So much of the spiritual work also is just being like completely self-sourced, which is nonsense in itself. We're community-based creatures. It doesn't exist. It's great to tackle codependency and to heal up in those areas and have a balance. But to every single person here, you need a man. Even the people who say, I don't need one, you need one. Because right now you may be using something that has been created and built by a man. Maybe all the things you rely on in order to do your life and to live your life, many of those things only exist because a man has spent time and put his consciousness into making it, to creating it out of nothing. And again, this isn't the comparison piece. I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to compare men against women or any. Women hold life. And they give birth to life. I mean, it's a whole other thing that we need here. But yeah, there is a narrative of, men are shit and men are, because of all the problems, it's because of men. They've done all the bad things and men are the problem. Men need to be better. Yeah, well, we all need to be better. We all need to aspire to be more loving and aspire to be kinder and aspire to be more generous. But to the men who feel like they don't matter, leave your house. You have to leave your house if you're isolating. If you don't like your job, fucking quit your job. You'll regret it if you don't. Oh, but Chris, what about the responsibility of bills and a family? Yeah, you're a man. You'll figure it out. We won't figure something out unless we have to. If you're comfortable and kind of slaving away and doing your thing and, but I wish my life would change, just start stopping doing things. Oh, but then I won't have any option. Yeah, but you'll figure it out. That's what we have access to as men. We can figure stuff out when we really need to figure stuff out. If you're not in tension in your life, you will wither away as a man. If you're not stepping into risks, you're withering away as a man. We have to be stepping into tension. We have to be challenging ourselves in that regard. So start doing things that are different. this will immediately start to give you a new sense of value and purpose in relation to yourself and what you're capable of. If you've never seen what you're capable of, how can you value yourself? Join a jiu-jitsu class. Go take martial arts. Go lift some heavy shit. Don't do any of it to avoid. Don't do any of it unconsciously. But go to meet some challenge. Like, these things will wake a man up. We're quite simple. That's just the reality of it. We're quite simple as men. If we engage certain aspects of our being, that will activate the biology in us. It will activate the DNA in us. It will propel us into feeling healthier, into feeling stronger, into feeling more upright and a part of the world. And for men, we matter. I hope I've made that evident through everything I've been sharing on this call. So much of what exists here is only here because of men. Oh, we'd all just be in mud huts if there was no men here. We'd still just be in mud huts, probably, hiding from animals, right? Without much safety. And that's just, I believe that's just the truth of it. So men are exceptional, beautiful, powerful creatures. And yes, we've done a lot of horrendous stuff, but humans have done a lot of horrendous stuff, and there's no need for us to make amends by carrying the shame and the guilt of the past. That won't do anything but further perpetrate it. What we need to do is completely switch that narrative into something of usefulness. And that is the biggest thing that will transform his feeling of not mattering. If a woman is listening to this, anyone who is not experiencing meaning in their life, it's because you're not being useful. The quickest way to trigger our meaning, our humanity, is by being useful and helpful to other people. Quickest way. But never do it for the reason to get that, because that's when it starts to contort itself. Do it because this is our agreement as humans. Let's help each other. Let's be kinder to one another just because we're human. And then watch what happens inside of you. One could say you're experiencing the felt sense and the transformative effect of being in alignment with your nature as a human. And I'll finish just on the point that one of the aspects of the spiritual thing right now in the New Age is there's a hyper focus on me. What am I getting? What's my growth? What's da. Now we can me ourselves into the ground. But we're not being of use. It does not matter how much me you look after if you're not extending all of the treasures that you have received through your work with yourself outwards into the world. You're going to stay miserable.
What an answer. I mean, let's leave it here, I would say, Chris. This was phenomenal, and I appreciate as well your willingness just to go into that depth around that question. So again, thanks for coming on, Chris. It's been a beautiful conversation, and I am very certain that the listeners will appreciate this conversation that we've had. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Your time and attention is truly appreciated. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for my upcoming episodes. And in case you know somebody who would find this episode helpful, I encourage you to pay it forward. Finally, if you've personally been receiving value from the show, one way you're able to support this podcast is by leaving a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Not only does this help more people find the show, but it also supports me in bringing more incredible guests on for the future. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and until next time, signing off.